O'Reilly.
Check engine light on? Take the guesswork out of your check engine light with O'Reilly Veriscan. It's free and provides a report with solutions based on over 650 million vehicle scans verified by ASE certified master technicians. And if you need help, we can recommend a shop for you. Ask for O'Reilly Veriscan today.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Oh, yeah. That is upcoming music from the new album as our intro for our new 9 o'clock Wednesday Central Standard Time readers' emails and comments. Anyway, I hope you like some of the new stuff that'll be coming on our upcoming album. We still don't necessarily have a title for, and I don't want to give it away, but this is Pilgrim Gray Chronicles. Our band is Pilgrims Gray. We have an album out called Elevensies. This is our Wednesday night Central Standard Time, 9 p.m. Show that we've added to the week. We have 3 shows, one at 8 a.m. on Mondays, and one at 8 p.m. on Fridays, Central Standard Time. The show on Monday is our long-form podcast where we go for about an hour, sometimes a little more, on subjects related to the strangeness of this world in the Seed War and going on stuff from the past all the way to the present and so on. Last Monday we covered Egypt because my wife and I have been talking about what happened to Egypt after the armies were destroyed in the Red Sea, and hopefully you found it interesting. If not, go listen to it. It's pretty cool, and I tried to introduce a little bit more entertaining music at the beginning of each section to better differentiate the sections. Let me know if you like it or if you don't. I plan to continue doing it because it's fun. But on the first email I want to share with you is somebody who asked me whether or not the track on our album entitled "Taken to the Skies," towards the end of the song, where it switches over to a major key and the vocals finish up and it kind of fades out for a second, then a piano starts, and then you hear female vocals, not really doing any vocals, but just singing along with the background music. And somebody asked me if that was, if we knew the members of the band The Warning, if anybody knows who they are. I looked them up. I don't know who they are, and I don't know why they would sing anything on our album. So to answer the question for that, no, that is not Danny or either of the other sisters from that band that I looked up, because I'd never heard of them. I guess probably because I get too busy with all this other stuff. Apparently they're pretty popular, and I listen to some of their stuff, and I think they're great. A lot of power, a lot of energy, and they're doing a great job. But no, it's not them. We don't know them, and that's not them singing on our album. I would have mentioned it or in the liner notes or somewhere. So to answer that, no. But we're going to go into some comments on our Shroud of Turin video, because I felt like that was a really important video, and it had a lot of good forensic evidence and historical evidence to it. And one of the reasons I want to share the comments from this particular section is because of Jeffrey Irwin, who did. I just want to give a shout out to him. If you're listening, Jeffrey, excellent work with the comments that you put out there. I think they're fantastic. You really know your stuff, and I appreciate your comments. And I want to go over them real quick with you. For those of you who don't watch this on the YouTube channel or comment there, you're hearing it somewhere else on Spreaker or Apple or Spotify. At our YouTube channel, under our limited liability company called You Will Know, that sponsors the band, and also does the podcast as a supporter. This YouTube channel is where I upload videos and some other commentary and things for, band videos and things of that nature. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that I'm terrible at social media. I'm still trying to do that to support our band and our music, and even the podcast. I just enjoy sharing information. I'm not the greatest at getting it out there. So with that being said, I want to share one of the first comments from a gentleman that just goes by Mick Punks. And I just, unfortunately, this is kind of typical YouTube comment. And anyway, he says, Jesus Christ, the Lamb and our Lord and Savior, was a black man and of the black tribe of Judah. Blessings to all who read this. May your eyes and hearts be open to see the truth and receive love, good vibes only, and praise to the Most High. I find the rest of it interesting after shooting out that kind of information. So I responded and I said, thank you for sharing your perspective. While skin color isn't the focus of Christ's mission, it's important to approach this topic with biblical and historical accuracy. Jesus was born into the tribe of Judah, a Jewish tribe from the ancient Near East. As such, he likely had the appearance of a first-century Semitic man, neither distinctly black or white by modern standards. In fact, advanced 3D imaging based on the Shroud of Turin, which many believe to be the burial cloth of Christ, has given us one of the most precise reconstructions of his appearance. I'm sure we've all seen it, right? The analysis conducted using forensic level detail shows a man of Middle Eastern Semitic features consistent with somebody from ancient Judea, and it aligns with both historical and biblical descriptions. And then I wrapped it up by saying ultimately what matters most is not his outward appearance, but his role as the Lamb of God, the Savior for all nations and tribes. And the gospel transcends race and culture, drawing all who believe into one family in Christ. I mention that only because I just don't understand why that even has to be said. The image of the shroud is right there on the video. You can see the 3D replica right there, and you can tell that if the shroud is genuine, and I believe it is, then that is most likely what Jesus looked like right there. You're welcome to come to the YouTube channel and check it out, and you'll see what I'm talking about. And then let's move on to Jeffrey's comments, because I think his were the best. Just one of the first ones he mentions is he says that Jesus predicted the miraculous images of his dead body when he made the prophecy that his burial would be for a duration of less than 72 hours. The shroud's images of a human corpse prove that his burial was for less than about 40 hours. The forensic evidence on the shroud has proven that the body it enclosed was removed before any decomposition had begun. And then he notes, to see the enigma of the sign of Jonah, Shroud newsletter, summer of 2023, so BSTS. So if you want to look that up, it's really great and is filled with quality information. I also want to share his comment here where he says, when John entered Jesus' tomb, he encountered something unexpected that caused him to see and believe. Now, the traditional theology is that John saw the empty linen cloth. However, that would only have been confusing to John. Jesus never said that his dead body was going to vanish into thin air. John would not have been expecting such an occurrence and would have thought that someone had carried Jesus' body away. So what was it that John and Peter saw? If the shroud had done nothing more than collapse when Jesus' corpse dematerialized, its images would have been on the inside of the cloth and would not have been visible to anyone entering the tomb. A clue may be found in what Peter was able to see from outside of the tomb. Luke recorded that Peter, by bending down, could see the Othania and nothing else. We know from John that the sudarium was in the tomb. If Peter could not see that cloth from outside of the tomb, that must have been because the sudarium was on a ledge in the tomb. The same can be said of the Sindoni. Jesus was not laid to rest on the ground. Tombs have a ledge for the deceased, and that is where the shroud would also have been. So the conclusion is that the Othania must have been on the ground for Peter and John to have been able to see those strips of cloth from a vantage point that was outside of the tomb. Some Gospels even say on the ground. The question is, what were they doing there? Jesus was not laid to rest on the ground, and the Sindoni and the Sudarian were not on the ground. How did the Othania end up on the floor of the tomb? So shroud skeptics have observed that a sheet wrapped and folded around a corpse would not have been able to record images that did not have distortions caused by those folds. And that's a good point. So the shroud must have been flat when its images were created, but the Sindoni was tied to the corpse by the Othania. The Othania must have untied themselves and then slid to the floor of the tomb so as not to interfere with the creation of the image on a flat sheet of linen. Skeptics rail at this hypothesis, but one cannot impose any naturalistic condition on a purportedly miraculous event without evidence. In this case, no one was in the tomb when the images were created, so no evidence exists for that naturalistic condition. However, as I have pointed out, evidence does exist for the hypothesis that the Othania untied themselves. Those claws were observed on the floor of the tomb where they should not have been. The conclusion, if the Othania untied themselves, then the idea that the shroud folded itself up so that its facial image of Jesus was visible must also be entertained. That is what John and Peter saw that so impressed them, the facial image of Jesus on his burial cloth. So I would only add to that that there's a good possibility that Jesus and his newly perfected body just folded the cloth up and put it on the ground himself as he was walking out. So that's one possibility also. So I responded by saying, it's clear you've studied the subject in depth, and your observations about the Othania and the shroud being flat during image formation are intriguing. We agree that the traditional explanation of John believing simply because of empty linen seems insufficient, especially considering how profoundly convinced he was. Interestingly, early Christian writings support the idea that John saw something extraordinary. One example comes from the 4th century writer St. Cyril of Jerusalem, who wrote in his Catechetical lectures, Peter therefore went forth, and that other disciple, and came to the sepulchre, and he saw and believed. What did he see? The linen cloths and clothes, and the napkin that had been about his head, not lying with the linen clothes, but wrapped together in a place by itself. This was a sign of resurrection, for had the body been stolen, thieves would not have taken the time to fold the napkin. Additionally, St. John of Chrysostom, in his homilies on the Gospel of John, homily 85:4 says, "For he entered in and saw the linen clothes lying, and he saw and believed." What did he see? That the grave clothes were not cast about, as is usual with dead bodies, but lying apart, and the napkin wrapped together in a place by itself, proclaiming that something beyond nature had taken place. These writings reflect the early Christian understanding that John's belief was not based on mere absence, but on the presence of compelling evidence, such as the burial cloths arranged in a way that pointed to resurrection, possibly even revealing the image. So then I continued and said, our video aimed to emphasize that something extraordinary must have been visible, something more than an empty tomb that pointed directly to resurrection. And then I said, your idea about the shroud folding itself to reveal the facial image aligns with the kind of miraculous event that would cause such immediate belief. It's fascinating how the gospel details, when closely examined, suggest purposefully positioning rather than randomness. And then I wrapped it up by saying, ultimately, while we can't be dogmatic about the exact mechanics, your conclusion highlights why the shroud remains such a compelling piece of evidence. I really appreciate your addition to the information and your well thought out reply. Thank you again. Because it was a great reply. And believe me when I tell you that good replies are rare on YouTube. And then I remember when he first posted this, where he said, at minute 21:21 in, it says, any shroud video made in 2025 ought to be aware that the Marino Rogers invisible repair hypothesis has been falsified several times over. The skeptics have a field day with that idea. And I get that, but here's the thing. I've already received emails and comments by people who aren't even familiar with any of that. My outreach is to both people who may know, for instance, like Jeffrey here, and also for people who, and like I mentioned in the video, one of the reasons I even brought it up is because there are so many people, when you bring up the Shroud of Turin, their instinct, because of brainwashing by this culture, the first thing they will say is that it was a medieval forgery, debunked, whatever. And they are completely unaware of all the modern day stuff, including the fact that particular test has been falsified. They don't know anything about it because it's not talked about. The only thing that was talked about is, oh, it's a forgery. Yeah, okay, so we can move on, and then nothing's ever said about it after that. So the general public that doesn't pay attention for the most part, unless they come across, oh, look at this image of Jesus, I wonder what this is about. Oh, that was debunked. And they'll leave a comment. Oh, that was debunked, and it's a 11th century forgery. And that's all they've got. They didn't dig any deeper than the headline BS that were fed by popular media. And so, but if you do dig, you find out the kind of things that are in my video, which has forensics from everything to the image being created after the bloodstains, to specific pollen that could only have been in Jerusalem at that time, during that time of year, and then later pollen, and they can tell that it came later, accurately depicting historical descriptions of where this shroud was taken throughout history. That is why, when you look at all the forensic evidence, you either have to believe in a series of incredible coincidences, or this is the shroud in proof of a resurrection of Jesus. So, another good comment that was made here by Jeffrey was the carbon dating of the shroud is explained by neutron absorption. Now, I had heard about this, but I didn't look deeply into it. And he mentions Rucker in 2020, so I looked that up. And I said, Robert Rucker's neutron absorption theory is one of the most compelling explanations for why the 1988 carbon dating was flawed. The idea that a neutron burst could have altered the carbon-14 levels in the shroud fits not only with scientific principles, but also with the unique radiation-like characteristics of the image itself. If a sudden burst of neutron radiation occurred, possibly linked to the resurrection event, it could have converted some nitrogen-14 in the linen into extra carbon-14, making the cloth appear much younger than its true first-century origin. This aligns with evidence that the image was not painted or manually applied, but rather formed through an unknown energy process. Rucker's work helps bridge science and faith, showing that the shroud's mysteries remain unresolved but deeply intriguing. Thanks for bringing this up. Also, I wanted to let you know, and everyone here know, that about our podcast tonight. So I wanted him to know by commenting that I would be bringing him up in the show this evening. Now, not every comment is positive. For instance, we have Alan Hales here, whose comments were, anyone who knows the Bible will know that the image on the Shroud of Turin isn't Jesus. Why don't people read and believe the Bible? I simply asked if he could share with us then the verses that explain away all the forensic, biblical, and historical evidence that certainly seems to substantiate that it is. And I kind of already knew what he was going to say, and that is, it's basically, I don't want to read this long post. Well, I'll read his shorter one here. His 2 points. One, the image on the Shroud of Turin looks nothing like as bad as Jesus would have looked because Jesus was so badly marred that he wasn't recognized as a man, according to Isaiah 52:14, whereas you can see that the image on the Shroud of Turin is a man. And then his second point was, nowhere does the Bible, the true Bible, and the biblical Greek say that Jesus was covered with a shroud. He was covered with strips of linen cloth and a separate head cover, as it was the manner of the Jews in those days. 2 biblical proofs that the image on the Shroud of Turin isn't Jesus. All right. So I responded to this, and I'm just going to read this one response because after that, essentially all he does is rehash the exact same argument over and over and over again, even though the video goes into great detail explaining why both those points are incorrect. So, but I'll read really quick. In response to his first point, I said, okay, so you're referencing Isaiah 52:14, which says Jesus was marred beyond human likeness. It's a totally valid point, but Jesus was brutally beaten, scourged, crucified. No argument there. The shroud actually does show serious injuries, deep wounds from Roman flagrum whips, puncture marks on the head, consistent with a crown of thorns, blood pooling from the side wound, and nail wounds in the wrist and feet. If anything, it's one of the most brutal depictions of a crucified body that we have, and it matches all the biblically described wounds. And then I said, but here's the key question. At what point did the image form? Think about it. If the image was created at the moment of resurrection, then it wouldn't just be capturing a battered corpse. It would be capturing a transition from death to life, from flesh to glorified form. The reason Jesus' face isn't completely destroyed on the shroud could be because he was already transforming into light, life, and glory when the image was formed. The radiation hypothesis, which even secular scientists acknowledge as a possibility, suggests that the shroud's image was burned into the linen by an intense burst of energy, possibly light itself. If Jesus' body was being restored and glorified in that instant, it makes sense that his disfigured state wouldn't be fully imprinted. In other words, the image isn't just a corpse photo, it's a snapshot of a divine event. In Isaiah 52:14, it describes Jesus suffering before his burial, not how he looked after being wrapped in linen. The Gospels tell us his body was prepared for burial in John 19:40, meaning he would have been cleaned before being wrapped. This also aligns with the Jewish burial customs. So yes, Jesus was marred, but the shroud isn't a picture of his worst moment, it's a record of his transformation. And then, to deal with the second one, dealing with being wrapped in strips of linen, not a shroud, I said, all right, this is another one here I hear a lot. The argument goes that the Bible never says Jesus was wrapped in one big shroud. It says strips of linen. But let's actually look at the text. Matthew 27:59 and Mark 15:46 both say that Jesus was wrapped in a clean linen cloth, which refers to a large sheet of linen, not little strips. John 19:40 mentions the othonia, plural for linens, and yes, that means multiple cloths, but this doesn't mean they weren't used together. John 20, verses 6 through 7 specifically says there was a separate face cloth, or the sudarion, which was found folded apart from the other linen. This actually matches up perfectly with the Shroud of Turin and the Sudarium Ovidio, which another burial cloth with bloodstains that matches the shroud. So what do we have? A large burial cloth, shroud, wrapping Jesus' body, additional linen strips used to secure the wrappings or apply burial spices, a separate face cloth, which explains John 20, verse 7, and this actually aligns with Jewish burial customs of the time. The idea that Jesus was wrapped like a mummy, that's more of a Western misunderstanding. If you don't believe the shroud is authentic, I get it. It's a big claim, but dismissing it based on these two arguments doesn't really hold up when you dig into the details. The shroud is a brutally accurate representation of a crucified man, far worse than medieval art ever depicted. There is a negative image that wasn't even understood until modern photography on it, a perfect fit with Jewish burial customs and the biblical account. An imprint possibly created by a supernatural event, Jesus transforming into his glorified state. And that last part is important. If the shroud was created at the moment of resurrection, then what we're seeing isn't just a tortured corpse, we're seeing a glimpse of divine power. So yeah, the shroud isn't some random medieval forgery. There's a reason it's still one of the most studied artifacts in the world, and if it's real, well, that's a pretty serious implication, isn't it? And that's kind of how I wrap things up with Alan. Basically, the video presents forensic evidence and a recorded history that indicates with great likelihood that it is the burial shroud of the resurrected Jesus. And, I don't want to go over the other negative comments that just aren't even worth mentioning, things that are like, what a load of trash or expletives or whatever, because they're just not worth our time. And then I'm just going to make this one last comment. In response to Adolfo Formoso. Anyway, he says, it's not from Jesus, it was made in the 11th century. And say, that's what I mean, folks. That is the most common response you typically get when you bring up the shroud with somebody who hasn't read up on it. So I'm just going to go over some of the quick things that I mentioned on this that were just taken straight from my notes. So I can, when somebody responds with that, I can just copy and paste it and post it super quick, because it's the same. I'm dealing with the same arguments all the time. So on this one, I said, it seems like you might not have watched the video or considered the overwhelming evidence that contradicts the claim that the shroud was made in the 11th century. Here are the key points that show beyond reasonable doubt that the Shroud of Turin is authentic and depicts Jesus. Number one, forensic and blood evidence. The shroud contains real human blood type AB with bilirubin present, which indicates traumatic torture. A forger in the 11th century would have no way of replicating this. Second, photographic negative and 3D properties. The shroud acts as a negative image, only discovered in 1898 by Secondo Pio. It also contains 3D spatial encoding that modern image analysis confirms. What 11th century technology could have created this? There isn't any. That's the answer. There is none. Third, forensic accuracy of wounds. The image on the shroud perfectly matches Roman crucifixion methods, wrist nails, scourge wounds, head punctures consistent with a thorn crown, and post-mortem blood flow. They match not just with crucifixion, but specifically how Jesus was killed and tortured with a crown of thorns and a spear in the side. Those marks are there on the shroud. Next, we have the blood first image second. Forensic testing showed that the bloodstains were on the cloth first, and the image appeared later, meaning it was not painted. The timing aligns with the resurrection narrative. And then we have linen dating matching first century textiles. Studies of the shroud's weave pattern, herringbone twill, and pollen analysis confirms its Middle Eastern origin consistent with first century Judea. And by the way, only rich people were buried in herringbone twill patterns, thus aligning itself with not just any crucifixion, not just anybody being crucified, but somebody who was crucified and buried in a rich man's shroud. The unusual thing about that is most bodies after crucifixion were thrown in a pile or burned or in a pit. So this is a highly unusual thing. Again, you have to believe, that all of this is just pure coincidence. And to me, if you're going to chalk all of that up to coincidence, then, you're just, I don't know. There's coincidence and there's coincidence, right? These, how many people who were crucified were buried in a rich man's cloth, matching the exact wounds of the description of Jesus's torture specifically? I would venture that narrows down the field pretty strongly, especially, the rich man's burial cloth being put on somebody who is shamefully crucified just doesn't happen as a frequent thing. And then we have coin imprints from Pontius Pilate's era. High-resolution images show very faint imprints of coins placed on the eyes, coins minted during Pontius Pilate's governorship, 29 to 32 AD. And then we have the contradictory carbon dating flaw, the infamous 88 carbon dating used, a contaminated corner later proven to be from medieval repairers, making the result invalid. Independent testing of the shroud itself dates it to the 1st century. So it isn't a medieval forgery. Not only do you have the carbon dating that initially gave it this medieval date being flawed, but there's no way to replicate what you find forensically there anyway, for it to even be a forgery. So not only is it impossible to make the forgery, but their test was BS. So then we have the sudden burst of energy hypothesis, where studies indicate the image was formed by a short, intense burst of radiation-like energy. This unexplained phenomenon aligns with the resurrection account. So what 11th century technology created this? I then asked, if you're confident in your claim, please explain how medieval forgers managed to produce a radiation-like 3D image with forensic precision, blood-first imprinting, and historical authenticity, placing pollen also from various locations on the shroud before photography or modern science could even detect these details. It's not possible, folks. And then we'll wrap this up with, I guess I won't mention that because it just is a rehash of Jeffrey mentioning the carbon dating cutting was not a part of the original cloth. Has been falsified on several counts. See, the carbon dating of the shroud is explained by neutron absorption, Rucker 2020. Either way, look, I don't necessarily care about the carbon dating thing. I think it is interesting, the neutron absorption explanation and all that. But my point is, there's 7 or 8 lines of evidence to clearly indicate that it's not possible for it to be a forgery anyway. So what difference does the carbon dating test even mean, except, for people who like that specific part of the forensics of it. You've got far greater lines of evidence that would indicate that it wouldn't be even if even if it dated back only to medieval times, it wasn't possible for them to go to these lengths to forge it anyway. So, with that being said, I'm going to wrap this up and just let you know that in the future, I'll be handling other comments like this and maybe other bits of information, like introducing new band music or any other interesting ideas that I come up with, including, your emails and comments. So if you want to hang around and check that out on Wednesday nights, just to see what other people are commenting on the videos and what that's all about, that would be awesome. I would appreciate it. We like anytime somebody stops by and comments, and we appreciate any support that you guys offer. I love to hear when we're doing a good job and what you guys like and what you want to hear more of. As long as it's keeping within the main framework of what we discuss. I won't be discussing football, for instance, but I will discuss modern forms of entertainment and how they brainwash you. In fact, having that TV on for much longer than 15 minutes puts you into a state of basically slight hypnosis so that you're available to suggestion. But anyway, all kinds of fun stuff. And I'm going to play you out with just a portion of one of the songs that we're working on for the new album. I hope you enjoy it. And the rest of your week is awesome. And we will see you again Friday, again at Pilgrim's Great Chronicles for our top 3 stories of the week. And we will see you there then. Have a great night, folks.